My name is Arekat, and I'm a Senior Director of Social Media and Digital Marketing at Place Advisory and Public Affairs. I'm also the founder of the Middle East Social Media and Digital Association in the region. And I'm really delighted you're joining us to learn more about the emerging hyperbolic digital narrative that has been taking the world by surprise. Over the next 45 to 50 minutes, we are going to cover something that I believe is one of the most consequential shifts in our industry and the last decade. And that is still not fully understood by most communications professionals. The age of hyperbolic social media is not a trend, and it's not just a phase. It's a structural change in how power communicates, how audiences behave, and how influence is won and lost. In the last 5 years, something fundamental has shifted, specifically for governments and institutions and political actors. They have stopped communicating like institutions and they started communicating like content creators. The rules have changed, the platforms have changed, and the psychology of the audience have changed as well. So most institutions now have caught up, and the briefing is about understanding exactly what's changed and why it works, and critically, what it means for every professional in this webinar. So let's dive in the exaggerated, overstated, inflated, and unhinged, as I would like to describe it. How many of you noticed that the way that actually government talk online, and it feels, especially in the West, is pretty much different, right? So it's becoming more aggressive, it's becoming more meme-like, it's more designed for engagement than diplomacy. And there is a reason for that. This is not accidental for sure. It's institutional communication norms that have collapsed under the diplomatic pressure. There's one idea that sits at the center of everything we are covering today. So governments are no longer communicating like governments, they are communicating like content creators. Think about what that actually means. The same communication instincts that built YouTube channels and TikTok audiences, emotional hooks, and simple narrative identity validation are now being used by heads of states, embassies, and public institutions. And that is not accident again, that is a strategic choice. And what we are here to understand is why the choice is being made, what it is achieving, and what the implications are for those of us who work in communications professionally. That's the thread we will follow for the next few minutes. Just to set the tone for the rest of the webinar here, 6 definitions that I would like us to understand. And before we go any further, I want to make sure that we're all working with the same language and on the same page. So these 6 terms actually are going to come up repeatedly throughout today, and they're worth being precise about and because they are often used loosely in the industry. So let's start with the first one, the one that I opened with, which is the key topic for today. The hyperbolic communication is not just an exaggeration, it's a language that is deliberately engineered to feel urgent and undeniable. The second one on our agenda for today is the outrage driven virality. This is not, again, accidental. It's a content specifically designed to provoke a reaction strong enough that people feel compelled to share it. So what they are actually trying to do here is to increase the level of shareability. The content as well, will go viral, given the nature of the different platforms, and definitely it might travel from a channel or platform to another. And that actually will expedite the entire process. The meme native state communication. So this is where it gets interesting. We are talking about governments and institutions adopting the visual language and humor of internet culture as an official communications strategy. And this is something quite unique and We've never experienced this before. So think about the last time you saw an official government social media post that made you laugh or shocked. That was actually, again, intentional. And the algorithmic amplification means that platform itself is doing the work, rewarding emotional and content over anything measured or nuanced, basically. The fifth one on the agenda is emotionally optimized content that is built backwards and starting from how the audiences feels, then engineering the message around that. So it's basically the other way around. And narrative warfare is perhaps the most important one for us today. It's not about winning arguments, it's about controlling which questions get asked in the first place. So this is not about lying, it's about which questions get asked and which get ignored. So keep these six in mind as we move forward with the presentation. And this is definitely the framework for everything that follows. The algorithm mechanics. So platforms don't reward truth, they reward engagement. And this is the common terminology that we're using on a daily basis for those who are working in comms and social media specifically and on the digital marketing front. Engagement is driven by emotion, specifically the kind of emotion that makes you react before you think. And this is what this is all about, and that's how they are capitalizing on it. So fear, anger, outrage, identity validation. These are not side effects of social media, they are the product. And the algorithm is designed to surface them because they keep people on the platform longer. And what gets punished actually? Nuance, caveats, measured institutional language, and anything that requires context or prior knowledge. So they are trying to simplify the language in a nutshell. The algorithm does not hate these things. It just can see them. They generate no signal. Here's the implication for our industry. So the structural logic of every major platform is fundamentally incompatible with the traditional institutional communication. And that's not a bug. That is the business model. And once you understand that, everything else where we are covering today starts to definitely make sense. Our next case study, it's about the internet first politics. And I'd like to open with this. So this is not a political judgment. This is a communications analysis. And whatever your views on the policies, the communication strategy is objectively effective on the metrics that platforms reward. So what happened when institutions figured this out? They adapted some consciously and some by accident, but the direction of travel is the same across the board. And platform native messaging, meme integration, and outrage as a distribution strategy, and creator style voice, these are no longer just tools for digital marketeers. They are now part of how governments and major institutions communicate. The question is no longer whether institutions will adopt these mechanics. Most already have, or are in the process of doing so, or they are at least considering it. But the key question here, and this is what I want you to hold in your mind, is what happens to credibility, to the trust of the institution, and to long-term influence when they do. And that's what the next section will address. So why does it actually work? Why the hyperbolic politics works online? Because understanding the mechanics is what separates a strategic communicator from someone who is just reacting to what they see in their feed. There are like three things happening simultaneously. First, the authenticity signal. When communication feels unpolished and direct, audiences read it as honest. The traditional institutional language, careful, it's hedged, formal reads as evasion, and the hyperbole reads as a conviction. That's a reality, and we have to work with it. whether we like it or not. The second one is the outrage loop. So every proactive post generates counter coverage. Critics shares it to condemn it, supporters share it to celebrate it, and either way it spreads and the opposition essentially becomes a free distribution network. That is not a coincidence, it's the feature. Third, the identity anchor. So the most powerful loyalty mechanism in a modern communication is not information, it's validation. When content tells an audience you were right all along, they don't just agree with it, they defend it. And here's the key observation that we would like to pause a little bit on. So the institutions that have mastered this, done something very deliberate. They've dismantled the formal register entirely because the informality is the message. And it says, I'm nothing like the institutions you're already distrust. So that is a strategic communications decision, and to a certain extent, it is working. And this takes us to the new era of digital diplomacy. So now let's shift the lens slightly, because this isn't about how institutions communicate outward. It's also about what happens when those same mechanics are used against them. In the digital age, coordinated narrative attacks are not improvised, they are engineered. And they follow the same logic we just discussed. Identify the emotional triggers, simplify the message, choose the right format, and deploy it where the audience already lives. And of course, if we are considering Truth Social or X, X is quite popular in our region. However, Truth Social is more popular in the US and the West. So these kind of platforms, they foster that narrative of controversial, and they like the simplicity in terms of messaging. And recently, it's been adopting as well the emotional triggers along with the meme first approach. And what makes them effective is not the content itself, it's the speed. By the time an institution has drafted a response, the narrative has already been accepted as a fact by a significant portion of the audience. So the tactics are consistent across every case where studied. They are simplified visual content designed for emotional impact, satire, and mockery to erode credibility, and platform native formats that bypass traditional channels entirely that I just mentioned about Truth Social and X. And the bottom line to this is the modern narrative attacks are not communications problems anymore. They are strategic operations and they need to be understood and responded to as such. Blur any, the facts of these kind of um, responses basically for these type of attacks. This slide breaks down exactly how a narrative attack is built. And what I want you to look at this not as a threat assessment, but as a communications brief, because structurally it's identical. So step one, it's a deep audience research. Before a signal piece of content is created, the target audience is mapped out and their emotional triggers as well. So that goes hand in hand. The deep audience research, of course, the target audience and segments and their emotional triggers. So their cultural flashpoints, their platform behaviors, the content strategy is built entirely around that audience, not around the message that the sender wants to deliver, which is a little bit unusual for us in the industry. Step two is to engineer the narrative. Take a complex reality and reduce it to something binary and emotionally compelling. So by choosing the format with the lowest cognitive barrier, the one that requires least effort to consume and the most instinct to share. And step three, to deploy and amplify, release it where the audience already lives, design it to trigger outrage and amusement or identity validation, because each of those emotions drives organic redistribution. So what we can take from this, the infrastructure behind sophisticated narrative attack is indistinguishable from a well executed digital marketing campaign. And same methodology, same tools, same logic. The only difference is the intent. Moving to the risk landscape. So we have discussed how the hyperbolic comms evolves and how it's getting adapted by many in the West specifically, and lots of constitutions as well. They are like considering adopting it and fostering it as a method and adapting that strategy to wherever that they live in different parts of the world. So as we have looked at how does it work, now let us look at what it costs. Because again, hyperbolic communication does deliver, but short term, and it delivers reach, engagement, and visibility, which is the kind of metrics that lots of leadership and decision makers, they would like to see in terms of increment. But the data tells a very clear story about what really happens after that. There is an interesting study that studied 126,000 stories and that have been shared across social media more than a decade. The finding was unambiguous. The misinformation, unfortunately, on social media spreads 6 times faster than factual content. The emotional misinformation, the content that is designed to trigger a strong feeling, spreads 20 times faster. That is 20 times, right? It's really crazy. And that is not a marginal difference. That is a structural advantage that false and exaggerated content has over accurate content every single time it enters the information ecosystem. And for communications professionals, this creates a very specific problem because the same mechanics that give hyperbolic content its reach are also the mechanics that make corrections almost impossible to land. And understanding the cost is not optional anymore. It's a professional requirement. And I would say like it's a prerequisite and pretty much mandatory for us to understand and weigh the kind of strategies that we are adopting and trying, of course, to implement for the different institutions and brands that we're working on. So let's look at the numbers because this is where the conversation moves from theoretical to a very real story. So starting with trust, only 32% of people globally now trust information shared on social media. And the recent studies back in 2017 that the number was 51%. So there is a significant dip right here. And that's not a gradual decline, that's a collapse. And hyperbolic content, it's the single biggest cited driver of it, basically. Then if we're looking at the engagement versus accuracy trade-off, so the content that generates the most engagement is 3 times more likely to contain misinformation. And then like the low engagement content, basically. So 3 times the algorithm is not neutral. It's actively selecting for content that is more likely to be misleading. And here's the one thing that I think should concern every communicator in this room. So organizations that adopt hyperbolic tones, they see a 40% short-term engagement spike, which is quite impressive. That's as well, sounds great. But within 18 months, they experienced a 28% long-term credibility drop among their core audiences because at the end of the day, this is the nature of the audiences. They are following the institutional accounts on media and social media to seek actually the correct and right narrative. So you get the spike and then you definitely going to pay for it. The 80%, 86% figure on the right tells you that the scale of the problem is 86% of people have been exposed to political misinformation in the last month alone. And of those, 64% initially believed it. So imagine, like, the difference between the amount of people that they saw and perceived that type of content and the amount of people that they actually believed it. And this definitely sort of redistributed that content. So in our world, the speed determines belief, not accuracy, and that is the environment we are operating in. Now, I want you to put some context around why all of this is happening at this scale and the speed. So the human attention span in 2025 is 8.25 seconds. So 8.25 seconds is the attention span for 2025, and that is really insane. And down from 12 seconds back in the 2000. Of course, the evolvement with the technology, the devices that they have developed significantly. And for context, this is shorter than a goldfish. So content that does not provoke a reaction in the first 2 seconds, it's algorithmically invisible. And it simply does not exist as far as the platform is concerned. 70% of people form their opinion about content based solely on the headline. So they actually never read the article. And hyperbolic headlines are engineered precisely for this kind of behavior to land a conclusion before anyone has engaged with the substance. 3 billion pieces of content are shared every single day across major platforms, and estimated of 38% of that contains some of the emotional exaggeration or misleading framing. The signal to noise ratio is not declining gradually, it is collapsing. And the economic cost for all of this is 78 billion annually dollars. Through market manipulation, through public health crisis, and reputational damage to institutions and brands. I'll leave you with one quote here at the bottom. So, because I think it captured it precisely. So, we are not living through crisis of misinformation. We are living through a crisis of attention. And misinformation has learned to exploit it perfectly. The trust deficit. So this is where the consequences land closest to home for us as communications professionals. So there is a paradox at the center of hyperbolic communication. The institutions that adopt it fastest, the ones chasing reach, chasing engagement, chasing virality, are simultaneously eroding the one thing they need most when it really matters, their credibility. So, and credibility is not something you can rebuild quickly. It accumulates slowly over years of consistent and reliable communication. And it drains fast, sometimes in a single news cycle. Look at the 5 consequences here, credibility erosion, the audience fatigue, and outrage inflation, the narrative fragmentation, and platform dependency risk. These are not abstract risks. These are patterns we are already seeing play out across industries and across governments, across brands that move too fast into the space without thinking about the long-term game. The question I'd put to everyone here is simple. What is your organization's credibility reserve right now? And is the content strategy you are running building it or actually spending it? This slide sets the heart of what I want you to take away from today, because this is the dilemma that every serious communications professional is sitting with right now, whether they've named it or not. So the short-term gain is real. Adopt hyperbolic mechanics and you will see immediate results. The reach will spike, the algorithm amplifies you, the media will pick you, and your existing audience will feel automatically validated. These are not imaginary benefits. But look at what's on the other side of the equation. So every exaggeration drains your credibility capital. Your audience becomes numb, which means the next post has to be louder or generate the same reaction. Trust erodes fastest among exactly the people you most need to persuade, the ones you haven't already decided. And when you need to retract something, the cost of that retraction almost always outweighs whatever the original post achieved. And eventually, your institutional identity becomes indistinguishable from the noise around it again. The outrage inflation trap is particularly important. And once you start, the expectations escalate. There is no neutral gear here because you either keep escalating or withdraw, and withdrawal looks like silence. And the platform dependency risk is just as serious if your reach is built on algorithmic amplification of emotional content. That reach is rented. So it's definitely not owned, and the landlord can change the terms overnight. And that is the dilemma, and navigating it well is what separates strategic communications from reactive ones. I want to sit with some code for a moment here. So the most dangerous moment for any institution is not when it starts communicating hyperbolically. It is when it can no longer stop. So that is the threshold, and it's closer than most organizations realize when they cross it. So here's what actually happens at the point. Engagement continues to rise. The metrics looks fine, but the audiences that matter most for long-term influence, the persuadable ones, the ones who haven't already decided, they quietly disengage. They don't argue back, they don't unfollow, they just stop listening. And that's like quite costly. And that is the invincible damage because it does not show up in your analytics. Your reach numbers still look good, your engagement rate still looks healthy, but your actual influence, your ability to shift opinion, to build trust, to be believed when it counts, that has already gone. And for brands, the threshold arrives when audiences can no longer separate the organization from the outrage it generates. For institutions, it arrives when a formal statement, a crisis response, a policy position, or an official announcement is dismissed as a noise. Because the credibility reserve that would have made people listen has already been spent on virality. So knowing where that line is, that is actually the real job. So how do we make sense of all of this strategically? So over the next few slides, we're going to walk through a part framework. And I want to be clear about what this framework is. It's not a playbook for how to go hyperbolic. It's an analytical lens. So you can look at any communication strategy anywhere and understand exactly what it's doing and why. So the four pillars are the narrative strategy, the tone of voice, and the amplification, and lastly, the risk and sustainability. So each one operates differently, which one has a logic to it, and together, each one, sorry, has a logic to it, and together they give you a complete picture of hyperbolic influence actually functions. So whether you are on the sending end or the receiving end, you will definitely be having a holistic overview of this entire framework. So let's go through each one separately. When it comes to the narrative strategy, at first, the most effective hyperbolic communications never actually state their conclusion. They arrange the evidence and let the audience arrive themselves. Because when people feel like they reach conclusion independently, they hold it much more strongly than if someone told them what to think. So ambiguity here is not a weakness. It's actually in this model, and it is a feature. It generates debate, and debate generates distribution. So the amount of shareability definitely will increase, and that is like the actual desired impact for that. The tone of voice is the one counterintuitive here. The most powerful tone in hyperbolic communications is often not loud. It's calm. It's to understand, anti-bureaucratic, and when everything around you is chaotic and aggressive. So choosing calm, confidence is itself as a statement, and it signals that you are above the noise and that you don't need to shout, that you already know how this ends. And the third one is amplification. So this is the one that most institutions still haven't fully understood. Criticism is distribution. When mainstream media covers something to condemn it, they delivered it to audiences who would never have encountered it otherwise. So every outrage response is a redistribution unit. The content does not need to be loved to spread. It just needs to provoke a reaction. And lastly is the risk and sustainability. So yes, there are visibility benefits. Yes, there is a narrative reach, but expectation escalation is real. So norm erosion is real, reputational volatility is real. The strategic question is always, what is the long-term cost of the short-term gain? And if you may use this framework to analyze, not just to admire, of course, but to look at it like from a different lens and to employ each one of these pillars particularly. So what this means for you, everything we've covered so far has been analytical, and now let's make it a little bit personal. So because the geopolitics, the case studies, the data, none of that is the point in itself. The point is what it reveals about communication as a discipline and what it demands from those of us who practice it professionally. So whether you are in PR, brand communications, social media strategy, policy communications, or digital marketing, the mechanics we've discussed today are already shaping the environment you work in every single day. And the question is whether you are navigating them consciously or just reacting to them. The next slide gets into the specifics of what that navigation looks like in practice. So the new comms reality, and let me be direct about something. So the brands that have mastered this are not the ones you'd expect. Challenger brands, DTC companies, cultural movements, they have been operating with meme native, emotionally engineered, and communication for years. And they have built enormous audiences doing it. Now, the difference is that the same playbook is being used by actors with nation state resources. The techniques are identical, and the stakes are different. And the press releases is not dead, but as a primary communication instrument, it is no longer sufficient. So the distribution infrastructure has moved, and the audience expectations has changed, and the format has to follow. So what does that mean practically? When we're talking about emotional resonance, it's not a manipulation, it's the entry point to attention. Without it, even the most accurate and important message goes unheard. Simplification is a skill, so not a compromise. The best communications make complexity accessible without making it dishonest. And platform behavior should inform your content strategy from the beginning, not the bolted on the on at the end, basically. And the question is never whether to understand these mechanics. The question is how to apply them without surrendering the thing that makes your communication worth trusting in the first place, your integrity. So that is the professional standard I'd hold this room to. Three questions for the industry, and I want to pause here a little bit before the takeaways and put these questions on the table. So these are not rhetorical, and I genuinely think these are the questions our industry needs to be sitting with right now. And I'd encourage you to think about how they apply specifically to your organization. So the first question, are institutions becoming entertainers when your message has to compete in the same attention market as memes and reels and creator content? What does that do actually to the substance of what you're communicating? And does the institution that refuses to entertain simply disappear from the conversation? The second one is virality replacing credibility. So we've seen the data on engagement versus accuracy, and in an environment where reach matters more than truth, what is the responsibility of the professional communicator? So where does that responsibility sit? And thirdly, can professionalism survive algorithm culture? So the algorithm does not reward restraint. It does not reward nuance or dignity or measured language. It rewards emotion. For those of us who build careers on exactly those qualities, that is a real and serious challenge. And I think these are the right questions. And I think the professionals who are asking them are the ones who are going to navigate this era pretty well. Just bringing everything together. So, eight things, and I'll move through them, but I want each one to land correctly. So, the internet has changed communication permanently. There is no version of this where we go back to controlled institutional messaging as the dominant mode. And that era is over. Second one is that the government now compete in attention markets, and that is a little bit bizarre enough. The competitor is not just the political opposition, it is the algorithm, the creator, the meme, and whatever is trending in the next 15 seconds. The third one is simplicity outperforms complexity. So, not because audiences are incapable of nuance, but because no platform rewards them for consuming it. And that is a structural reality, not a judgment. Um, the fourth one is emotion spreads faster than facts. So every time this is documented, platform verified, and consistent across every study we have, your communications strategy needs to account for it honestly. The fifth one is the national narrative as a strategic asset. So the institutions and countries that invest in coherent, proactive narrative building are measurably more resilient when they come under pressure. Narrative is basically the infrastructure. And the sixth one is the hyperbolic communication is becoming institutionalized. So what started at the fringes is now standard practice for embassies, for governments, and established organizations. The normalization is accelerating rapidly and faster than ever before. The reverse engineering aspect is now standard practice, and content is no longer built from the message outward. It is built from the audience inward. Audience psychology precedes everything else. And finally, your audience's attention is the battlefield. So every actor, every brand, and every movement and every institution is competing for the same finite resource. So understanding the mechanics of that competition is no longer optional. It is the actual job. And allow me to close with this. So the future of influence may not belong to the most powerful institutions. It may belong to the actors who best understand internet behavior. So that is not a comfortable thought for large, of course, established organizations, but it is an honest one. So what we've covered today is not a warning to stay away from these mechanics. It's an argument for understanding them deeply so they can make conscious and strategic choices about how and when, to what degree actually you engage with them. The communicators who will lead this environment are not the ones who are the loudest or go loudest. They are the ones who understand the system well enough to navigate it on their own terms, who know where the line is and who can deliver reach without sacrificing credibility. So who can be emotionally resonant without being manipulative. And that is a very high standard, but it's exactly the standard that this room should be holding itself to.